From Software's Hidetaka Miyazaki addresses recent mass developer layoffs, assuring Dark Souls and Elden Ring fans, quote, that's something I would not let happen. Amid thousands of recent video game developer layoffs, From Software president Hidetaka Miyazaki reassured fans that he won't let the same unfold at the iconic studio behind Elden Ring. The past couple of years, despite boasting some monumental game releases like Baldur's Gate 3 and Starfield, have been anything but kind to many developers. From mass layoffs at EA to hundreds more at Take-Two Interactive, various companies have seen countless members of staff made redundant in 2023 and into 2024. News of such cuts is always disillusioning, to say the least, but there are still studios finding success, retaining staff, and even growing despite industry hardships. One of those is none other than From Software, the company behind Bloodborne, Dark Souls, Armored Core, and most recently Elden Ring. Speaking to PC Gamer in a recent interview, Miyazaki shared his thoughts regarding these widespread layoffs. Quote, speaking to myself and this company, I want to say that this is not something I would wish on the staff at From Software in a million years, says the beloved dev. I'm pretty sure our parent company, Kadokawa, understands that and shares that view. In fact, not only has From Software remained unaffected by the consistent waves of layoffs, the company has actually grown. Since starting on work on Elden Ring, the studio has expanded so much that it's able to comfortably develop 2 titles at once, as demonstrated by Armored Core 6. Miyazaki cites late Nintendo president Satoru Iwata while sharing his thoughts on layoffs. Quote, I think it was the old ex-president of Nintendo, Iwata-san, who said that people who are afraid of losing their jobs are afraid of making good things. I'm paraphrasing that, but I totally share this view. The From Software dev continues, assuring fans that the corporation overseeing his own team is aware of his thoughts. I think it's true, and I think people at Kadokawa, our parent company, understand that I hold this view very strongly. While we can't say 100%, we can't say with complete certainty what the future is going to hold from and Kadokawa, at least as long as this company is my responsibility. That's something I would not let happen, Miyazaki concludes. So hopefully our players and our fans can take a little bit of assurance from that. I think it's safe to say that the Souls community certainly does take comfort in knowing the mastermind devs behind their favorite games aren't at risk, or at least I definitely. Since it was an interview, there was some other interesting things that came out from this, so I'll go on to another games radar from Hirun Cryer. Hidetaka Miyazaki sparks hope for better co-op and future FromSoft games, says they'll consider ideas like Elden Ring co-op mode with 3.7 million downloads. Co-op mod with 3.7 million downloads. Elden Ring's director has commented on the game's uber-popular seamless co-op mod, saying it's the sort of idea From Software might even consider implementing in future games. With over 3.7 million downloads, the seamless co-op mod on Nexus Mods is one of Elden Ring's most popular mods by far. It's easy to see why. The mod removes all co-op barriers and restrictions so that it's theoretically possible to play the entire RPG with a friend, from the tutorial right up to the final boss. It's seamless in name and in nature. With that in mind, PC Gamer asked Elden Ring director and From Software studio head Hidetaka Miyazaki for his opinion on the mod and what it does for the RPG itself. Quote, it's definitely not something we actively oppose or want to downplay wanting to go through the whole game together, Miyazaki said of seamless co-op's grand ambitions. In terms of where we were with Elden Ring, it was simply a case of wanting that more loose, casual style, drop in, defeat a boss, drop out. It doesn't put any technical restrictions on the player. It just sort of lets them complete this focus and then move on, so to speak. The Elden Ring director continues. Elden Ring's co-op is very much in keeping with From Software's tradition in the Soulsborne games, bar a few exceptions like summoning pools. Players are summoned in to defeat a boss or explore an area, and once said task is complete, they're summarily kicked back out to their own world. It's meant to be a relatively short-lived experience, something that the mod obviously overhauls in every way. Quote, that's not to say we won't consider other ways like you and your friend played from beginning to end, total co-op. That's not to say we won't consider ideas like that with our future games, Miyazaki concludes. It's far from a promise that seamless co-op might be implemented in a future From Software game, but it's definitely a promising start. So, I'll tack onto this real quick, just because I found it was interesting. Miyazaki says that his ultimate RPG has not yet been made. But it's coming. It's getting there. Which people were surprised Elden Ring's not that. I'm looking forward to that. Side tangent. But, I mean, other than that, it's good that we're getting some kind of, confirmation from Miyazaki himself that layoffs won't happen. Going back to the first story.
Well, put your money where your mouth is.
Exactly. That's, it's nice to say those things, but it also puts the onus of, well, if you do layoffs and they happen.
We saw what just happened with Xbox. All their talk about how much they care about their studios,
Exactly.
So.
The one saving grace that From Software has.
And I also want to put on From Software, really well known for having a lot of crunch. So, like, okay, yeah, you're not laying your people off, but you're not treating them super well either.
Yeah.
So, like,
layoffs are worse, but crunch is still a problem.
Yeah.
It's just been overshadowed by all
I'm not in the business of comparing bad workplace environments. You know,
I just think losing your job is worse than working hard at your job. As a general thing. Some people's lives hinge on having a job in the first place.
Sure, yeah, but I mean, like, both suck, and I don't want either of them to happen.
I mean,
and we live in a world where we can stop both of them from happening.
It changes when it's down to individual people, of course. But the thing that From Software has to make those words hold more weight, and it's kind of an exception that they occupy in the gaming space, they've hit their stride with the kind of games they want to make. They made Armored Core 6, which was the biggest diversion from it, but, you had Sekiro, Bloodborne, all of the Dark Souls, now Elden Ring, that all occupy a pretty similar space with how they play. It's a good groundwork to go off of, and they're able to extend out to do cool things with that, but it allows for them to have more security than someone like, throw something out there, fucking BioWare. Yeah. BioWare, they had their IPs, but they kind of innovated with things, they changed things up, and it kind of made them lose their vision. Whereas From Software doesn't seem to be going in that direction. Kadokawa, they probably share that belief with Miyazaki, partly because they think they've hit their thing with the games they're making right now. And also, Japanese studios have proven to be more resistant to just mass layoffs or shutdowns in comparison to more Western-based devs. It's not unheard of, but Nintendo comes into mind where the CEOs took a pay cut to prevent layoffs from happening. Would this same thing happen here? It's debatable, but at least it's some kind of confirmation that it's not like imminent.
Well, it instills hope that, hey, all right, these guys seem to be doing things right. We want them to be doing things right because they're currently the industry's golden child. And so you just, you hope that they continue down the path of, like, doing things right. This gets tricky because life throws a lot of curveballs at you. What happens when FromSoft misses? We haven't seen that yet since they've started really with Dark Souls. You could argue Dark Souls 2, but that game was still successful.
Yeah.
So they have not missed yet. What happens when they do? That's when things get a little tricky and we have to, make some decisions, and it may not be the grandest decisions in the world, but hopefully they're also putting themselves in a position where they can take a hit, where they can take a loss, or maybe they can even take a couple losses in a row without having to worry about things too much. You would hope so. You hear, we don't have to speak to Elden Ring's success. And, the numbers sold and the expectations surpassed and yada, yada, yada. But the legs on that game are also impressive. You look at what Kai Cenat did, the popular Twitch streamer, did just last month. Mm-hmm. I think it was last month, maybe a month before, where he had a week-long Elden Ring stream where he just played the game on stream and didn't stop until he beat the game, which was really, really impressive, and he garnered a lot of attention, a lot of eyes. And I know talk around SGF from people who work at Bandai Namco and Elden and FromSoft were saying, hey, yeah, he did a lot to mm-hmm. We saw an explosion in sales 2 years after the game came out. And what a perfect time that happened, coincidentally, right before they put out their major expansion. So, their expectations for what Erdtree is going to do has now grown as well. Even despite the fact that, I'm sure they had their expectations set pretty realistically, and that realistic expectation was still probably pretty high.
Most players probably would have tried to do the DLC.
Yeah, well, it's being treated as a Elden Ring 2 or like an Elden Ring 1.5. Mm-hmm. Not a full new game, but it's going to be sizable, and you can kind of treat it almost like a new game. So that's really fun and impressive. To speak to your point, Connor. Yeah, they've hit their stride. They know their formula. They know how to do things. They know how to do what they do very well. But I love they're still willing to experiment. They're still willing to try new things. They're still willing to take criticism and look into the community and go, well, what does the community want from our games? Oh, well, there's this really popular co-op mod. We play around with co-op and stuff in our games, but we don't really do it to the lengths that like players seem to want us to do it. So maybe that's something we incorporate in the next game, probably in Elden Ring 2. Is we figure out how to incorporate co-op a little bit better and so forth. So
not even just co-op, but multiplayer in general.
Yeah.
I remember in the days of Dark Souls, PvP has always occurred. But I vividly remember, because it was my own personal experience, playing Dark Souls 3, going to areas where there was, high amounts of PvP going on. And in particular, there was this one area that basically had an arena. It wasn't exactly one, but it served as one. And I would join into other people's games, and there'd just be a whole score of players, like standing up on the elevated platform, watching a fight go on, and then they would change out and, alternate as they saw fit, with the host standing off to the side so people don't get booted with him dying. And very few times can I say a game has players that go to the links that FromSoft players do
That's
to go play
incredible.
It's so cool. It was such a cool time. And you actually see like some PvP stuff in Elden Ring really pop off. It looks sick as hell. The problem is, as this mod kind of showcases, they don't really plan their games around co-op or multiplayer. So that is probably one of the best directions they can go in with future titles. Not necessarily make multiplayer games, since it seems like even though that'd be interesting because they would be experimenting, it would bring some uncertainty, breaking their formula, and they don't make multiplayer games, so solely multiplayer games.
It kind of keeps that spirit of alive that you and I have been lamenting
Yes.
on the podcast, that we are nostalgic for the era of great single-player games with kind of tacked on multiplayer type components, but sometimes those multiplayer components would be really good and would hit really hard. It's kind of aligned within that spirit, it's a little janky, it doesn't work, exactly the way you really would think it would or want it to, but it does work, and it allows us as players to kind of create moments and worlds and eras of these games that matter to us. For us, we are Mass Effect 3 babies. Where we played the fuck out of that Mass Effect 3 multiplayer. So good. And there were a bunch of other titles like that as well that we also played around with and did fun stuff in the multiplayer for these games as well. Last of Us is another example, and there's a couple others in there as well. But FromSoft is kind of, I think, navigating the industry in a way to where they are almost able to kind of bring that back, where they're saying, well, we're focused on our main game. That's our focus, and we're going to put that out there. But as we continue to go and continue to grow, we are seeing opportunity to kind of incorporate these new ideas and incorporate these new systems that maybe we aren't super familiar with, but we're willing to learn, and we're willing to take note and figure out how to do it better in all these different ways. And we are watching the community and what they're doing with mods and such, and learning how to implement that into our own stuff. That's a sign of great art. That's a sign of great direction, and that's a sign of great leadership. And despite the success, and I'm sure there's still ego in the room, but it shows that they are at least humble enough to know they don't have all the answers, and they're willing to continue to learn. I'm sure they're also at the same time going, yeah, but we made Elden Ring, So
hey, all these people are closing and downsizing. We increased our staff. We're expanding.
and that's impressive and worth acknowledging and so forth. But I also appreciate that they're also at the same time going, oh shit, you guys want that? Oh, fuck, how do we do that? Do you know how to do that? I don't know how to do that either. You don't know? All right, well, I guess. All right, load up a YouTube tutorial real quick. Let's figure out how to do that.
Hey, just don't take the path of Icarus. Don't fly too close to the sun. Hubris.
My only thing about it is, I was watching you play Elden Ring in preparation for the DLC this week, right? And I walked in and I was watching you fight some mini boss or whatever, nothing really important or whatever. And it was a horseback fight, and you and I were lamenting about how the boss fights in that game on horseback aren't very interesting and really pretty easy. As soon as you find the pattern, you just kind of swerve in and out and do it.
It runs.
You're basically just kind of waiting the boss out until one of you drops dead. And we kind of discussed game development wise, why is it like that? And you go, well, all right, well, this is the first game with a mount, and it's the first game with a jump. from this team. Sekiro obviously had a jump. And I think the experience they had in Dark Souls, did they do the Bloodborne one? Or I guess that was still on one team, and then Dark Souls 3 and Sekiro split off? No?
Hard to tell at some
Hard
point.
to tell?
I feel like the people who made Sekiro also made Elden Ring.
It's hard.
Yeah.
No. Because they went off and did Armor Core.
Oh, yes, they did do that. Yeah, never mind.
Yeah. So Sekiro and Armor Core, you look at that game and they go, oh, well, the fights account for verticality in a way that the fights in Elden Ring kind of don't. I'm painting with a broad brush, but you would probably agree with me in that
I would.
The jumping mechanic isn't really taken advantage of from a boss design perspective.
There are multiple points where I think I can jump over something, and certainly that does matter sometimes, particularly with like one of the final bosses, who I consider the best boss fight in Elden Ring.
Yeah,
but you're right, and for most of the time they do not take advantage of that. I think even more so because I think that just takes a little bit of tweaking.
Yeah,
to do right.
That's oh shit, we didn't think of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The horse combat is where it starts. Like, you have to make a whole entire basic different system.
Yeah.
On how you operate in the game. And that's a heavy task. It obviously won't be coming in any form with Elden Ring or the DLC. So the next game is, I think they've gotten the idea of mounts. They've gotten to like the idea of mounts, just like I do. Because I've said it before, I think Torrent's probably the best mount in gaming. The more I play it, I'm just like, it so seamlessly goes across the landscape and does what you need him to do. But combat, it does feel janky. I dodge an attack and then I heavy attack.
It feels like you're manipulating the game in a way that the game doesn't want you to.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's just, I think it's an oversight of them not having the experience of knowing what to do with the mount. And nice for the future if they capitalize on it. But I don't really know what form that'll entirely take.
But within that same breath, okay, we've done the mounted combat. We've implemented jumping into our game now. So we've got a little bit of everything going on at once, and we're learning from all these things and how we can incorporate in design. They continue to develop that idea and get better. Have that same mindset with things like multiplayer, things like co-op, things like competitive play of some kind. Figure out, how do we balance armor sets and weapon sets and the variety of all those, and how do we get those to work in clashing with each other? Or how they work together. How does progression work co-op wise? When you beat a boss, who gets the reward? The guy who does the most damage? The guy who gets the final kill? Do we get an even reward between the two regardless? How does that work? What is a seamless co-op world, and how do we implement that into our game? When you drop in, drop out, how do you continue to tail your experience through that? Because don't get me wrong, if you're in, or correct me if I'm wrong, if you're in someone else's world, you're not gaining experience, right?
It's been so long since I've jumped into it. I think you do, but I don't think it's the full experience.
Okay.
Yeah. Definitely it's all based around if the host dies.
And you're not, if we both start a new game, and I go and jump into your world, and we go and beat Margit, we then have to leave your game, come back to mine, and then make that same progress again, right? Yeah. So how do we get it to where we can kind of do this together? Borderlands does this very well. Borderlands 3 specifically did it so stupendously well that it's kind of the gold standard of how to do seamless drop-in, drop-out co-op, shared world type stuff.
I'll ask you to explain, because my example was going to be Baldur's Gate 3, just in terms of you being able to go through the entire game, all experience shared and whatnot. But it has an issue with when you have the team that you start out with, that's it. You can't add a new player with their own original presets. They have to use like presets.
You have to use one of the other characters to implement another one that's joined your game. Baldur's Gate 3, I think, is a fine example, but it's janky. But I think the reason Baldur's Gate 3 is so janky is because of its focus on narrative. It doesn't treat different players who are controlling different characters as different people. They are all the player character, So it makes it difficult when I'm doing choices that I would do, but Phil happens to walk ahead faster than me and trigger the cutscene that is important for the romantic relationship that I'm building. So now he's making those choices and I'm not. And then the progression of how characters feel about the avatar are complicated.
Which at that point, I temper expectation.
Yeah.
And just say, okay, this is a game where I don't give a shit about the other party members. It's just me and my friends who are playing,
Yeah.
But
are we still talking about Baldur's Gate?
Yeah.
Okay. Reiterate that, because I don't understand what you're saying.
All of the stuff that with dialogue and like character relationships, I just throw out the window. The only time it really becomes an issue is when you're dealing with like no, because then even it can
See,
be
that's
bypassed.
weird, because that's why I'm playing a game like Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah.
But
That's why you temper your expectations about what you're getting out of playing with friends. You change it.
Yeah.
But I do agree. It doesn't change the fact that it is
I guess
janky.
it becomes less about the characters and it becomes more about the quest.
Yes.
Okay.
That's how I frame it in my mind. Makes those criticisms a lot less heavy.
Feels
but they're
more
still
like
there.
D&D.
Yeah, exactly. But Borderlands 3, what makes it so above the rest that you can just enjoy it so much?
Well, first of all, in direct comparison, choices aren't a thing in Borderlands games.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of, it is what it is. But it does a very good job of whoever's hosting, that's the quest progression that we're working off of. But if you are working with me, you are getting that quest progression as well. I could be wrong, but I think Borderlands 3, if you skipped ahead because you joined my game for whatever reason, even though I'm ahead of you, and completed quests, if you went back to your game, caught up, I think you then could skip those quests that you'd already done. I could be wrong or have that kind of not put correctly, but basically any progression you're doing together carries for both playthroughs. So it's really just a checklist of like, have they done this? Yes, they have. Have they done this? Yes, they have. Have they done this? Yes, they have. And when you go back to your world, the game still treats you like you have still done that progression. And on top of that, the difficulty difference between players who are working together or not, like if I'm level 30, you're level 10, the game curves the difficulty for you to make it to where you're not getting your fucking teeth kicked in. And vice versa. If I'm level 30 and working in a level 10 world, the game curves it up so that the game is still challenging for me and I'm not just fucking splattering everything across the world. That is the kind of thing that you would want to see from an Elden Ring. Now, I think Elden Ring does a good job of just like tailoring the experience along with your progression. So like, I just don't see how it would work if you're 40 hours deep in working environments that my 10-hour deep character is not working in yet. I don't see how you could possibly make it a satisfying experience for me to join your game.
I feel like they do, like, similar to what you're saying with Borderlands 3, make it to where if you join in someone's world, you're going to be scaled to their stuff.
But again, Borderlands is a game where what you are currently doing doesn't matter so much. You like what are you in for a Borderlands game for? You're in for, we're shooting guns, we're having fun, it's a good gameplay loop. We're getting more powerful and unlocking abilities, right? Mm-hmm. That is kind of what a FromSoft game is kind of like, but it is the tailored experience of becoming more powerful alongside the level design, alongside the world design, alongside the enemy design, and so forth. Borderlands has a little bit of freedom in just the mass amounts of quests that are in that game. There's hundreds of quests in that game, and you can tackle them, main quest aside, you can kind of tackle them in whatever order you want as long as you're there, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Elden Ring, you gotta beat Margit to get to Godfrey, to get to God, like it goes on that way, right? Like, and there's some looseness to that. You can go and fight 10 other bosses before fighting him, or you can fight those 10 bosses after fighting him, and that doesn't really matter. But the big guys, the ones that matter, you're probably gonna fight them all in the same order, or at least a similar order. You know what I mean? So it's just, so they are tailoring those boss fight designs to be connected to where they believe player progression is going to be. And if not, then go fuck off and grind and come back.
And when you say things like that, it really shows they would have to frame a lot of the game around a multiplayer element, like they're talking about here, rather than just be something that's kind of tacked on as it has been.
I think it gets tricky. I understand the want to do it in a co-op, seamless world, open world game, but I think that's where it gets the most tricky. A game like an Armored Core 6 or even a Sekiro, I think works in its favor a lot better. One, Armored Core 6 is mission-based, so we can just kind of pick and choose the missions that we want to do in the order that they are available to us, and that kind of just works that way. You, of course, have to change some fundamental game design stuff to accommodate for a second player, but it would just kind of work in that way. A Sekiro or a Bloodborne even, I think you would need to have a different mode. You would need to, harken back to the days of old of like, well, this is the main campaign that you're here for, but here's also a fun, shorter co-op experience, a co-op campaign that you're here for as well. Or here are some missions, or here's a mode where it's a boss rush mode with two of us kind of going through. But again, how do you balance cooperative play like this that doesn't break boss design? Because that's why you're there, in terms of who has aggro, how aggro is grabbed. I mean, undoubtedly, when you grab a bunch of summons and stuff for your Elden Ring boss, the game kind of turns pretty easy because you're the one doing all the damage and your summons are pulling all the attention and they're taking damage better than you can. So it's like, all right, well, yeah, I'm going to bring the summons in. I'm going to do all the damage, back the fuck off, wait for him to get aggroed on him and then do more damage. Like, that's just kind of how that gameplay loop works. So, like, how do you accommodate that in a co-op setting? It gets tricky. They have enough experience to figure it out.
Yeah, and we'll see if they actually do implement it in the first place. This could all just be thoughts they have, and then when they try to put it into practice, they say, it doesn't work.
And if that's the world we end up living in, okay, that's what mods are for.
Yeah, this is a game that lives and breathes on and on down the years through mods.
Yeah.